Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Catspaw, which is episode 1 of season 2 of Star Trek, the original series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, one episode at a time, and this video I'll be covering the episode Catspaw. So Catspaw is the episode where Kirk and crew beam down to the planet to try to discover Scotty and Sulu where they disappeared, and they come across a lot of cheesy Hollywood Halloween mumbo jumbo nonsense with black cats and witches going woo and dungeons, and then ultimately they find these two aliens who are become power hungry, and one of them all of a sudden changes his mind and to help Kirk and Spock try to escape, but the other one, this woman who can turn herself into a giant black cat, is power hungry and tries to kill Kirk, but Kirk gets the better of her and they both turn into these tiny little puppets and die. So yeah, I did some research on this episode because I wanted to find out who was the fucking genius that thought it would be a great idea to have a Halloween Star Trek episode. Yeah, so this might have worked on like Gilligan's Island or the Brady Bunch or something like that, but it totally and completely cheapens Star Trek. Now, it's funny because I went on IMDb to read some user reviews, and I totally expected like a bunch of reviews giving it a 1 or 2 and trashing it and telling you how much is garbage, but I was amazed of how many people really liked this episode, or at the very least thought it was a decent episode. I'm like, oh, one person even said reviews, this is my favorite episode of Star Trek. I'm guessing that person isn't that familiar with the Star Trek franchise as a whole. That's just my guess I would make. Maybe I could be wrong, but anyway, so after I watched this episode, to be fair, and this was a hard thing to do because I hate this episode so much, but I actually went back and watched parts of it again because always when I watch, about to do a review, I always do, pay close attention to the episode, analyze it, kind of try to summarize it and get into the analysis and bare bones of the episode. But when I watched this episode just now and trying to do that, I really didn't know what happened, and I didn't really know what it was about. It seemed like it was just a bunch of Halloween nonsense with black cats and witches and wizards, but it didn't actually, the actual plot wasn't cohesive at all, and didn't actually, in voodoo, they threw in voodoo in there for good luck, for good measure, and it seems like it was a bunch of nonsense thrown together. I'm like, so what? I was trying to figure out, what actually were the motivations of these two aliens. So we eventually find out that all this shit's going on because there's two aliens from another galaxy who went to this planet that they're not native of. Apparently their existence is completely different than humanoid existence, and so they were taking humanoid form. They have a device called the transmuter that lets them use their mind to change energy into matter and matter into energy, and they were very unclear on whether or not their powers were more similar to the Telosians from the Cage that would just use illusion, or if it's more like a holodeck where they're actually changing energy into matter and then back. That was confusing. I don't think the episode itself knows this, but anyway, so it's about these two aliens who don't really know what it's like to be humanoid, and one of them gets overwhelmed by the sensation and I guess immediately turns evil because she takes enjoyment out of torturing people and using them as their playthings. But then for some reason she thinks Kirk is hot and wants him to make out with her, and I guess because she likes the sensation of making out as well as the sensation of killing people or whatever, and and but when Kirk is resistant, she tries to voodoo the Enterprise and threaten to kill because they don't want Kirk to leave. At one point the wizard dude was like, oh, you must tell us what you know, and then they don't really bring him back. So what exactly did they want Kirk and Spock to do? Why did they lure them down, and why did they keep putting all these spooky warnings about go back? And then the wizard guy even says, oh, you defied our warnings. But then it seems like they actually wanted them there because the Sylvia chick wanted to wouldn't let Kirk and Spock leave. So first they're saying you have to leave, we can't stay here, and then they're saying you can't leave, we need you to stay here. And okay, so it doesn't make any sense. So if you look at it one way, you could say, oh, because the dude says, oh, we were testing you. So because when they do the bullshit with the rubies and I'll pay you these rubies to leave, and Kirk's like, we can make tons of this shit on the Enterprise, we don't need it. And he was like, oh, well, my mistake, but regardless, you passed my test. It was all a test to see if you would leave your commerce behind, and you passed our test, and therefore you get to talk to my crazy girlfriend and then get locked in the dungeon again. What do they want from them? It doesn't actually make any sense. I totally don't get that. And then, when we see the two aliens arguing amongst themselves, and one's like, oh, you're straying from our mission, the wizard dude's like, you're straying from our mission, and she's like, I don't care about our missions, I want to feel sensations. And what exactly was your fucking mission? What is your I don't think this episode knows, and that's what I'm saying. I think this episode was a complete mess. They just wanted to have some excuse to throw in a lot of Halloween imagery bullshit as much as they could, and it doesn't actually make any fucking sense. That is my ultimate conclusion. Now, from reading one of those user reviews of this episode, they did come up with a somewhat interesting theory. But I think it's kind of fansplaining, trying to hold together, giving this episode more credit than it deserves. As their theory was that these aliens were, have the ability to read thoughts and minds, but they don't really understand human and humanoid life forms. So what they were actually reading was the nightmares of the people, but they were interpreting it as reality, and so that's why they were recreating all these nightmarish imagery, because they thought that was exactly how human existence was, and they were trying to make them at home. And which, to be fair to this theory, would go along with the fact why the dude gave all the gems and shiny stuff to Kirk, who doesn't give a shit about it because they're not very good at reading minds. So you could say they were reading the unconscious, nightmares and dreams. But as I said, I think that's giving this credit way too much episode. I think that's kind of fansplaining, trying to make something that is a pile of shit actually look good. It's actually, I don't think the writers had that intention. I think the writers' intention was simply, hey, let's do a Halloween episode, so let's just throw in a bunch of spooky bullshit and Halloween imagery and have this vain villain who turns into a giant cat and chases the crew down the hall. And then I picture a pitch meeting where the screenwriter is like, oh yeah, so we're gonna just do, I want to do a Halloween episode, and we're gonna throw in a bunch of cats and these aliens that do this spooky shit and trap Kirk and Spock there. And the producer guy is like, oh, well, why do they want to do this? What's their purpose? And the screenwriter replies, unclear. Or no, it could be like, what is their character motivations? Character motivation? Pass. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of the pitch meetings. They're hilarious. Or, 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 so, um, yeah. Oh, and the producer guy would be like, "Oh, let's have them make out." Yeah, the Kirk's is we gotta push how sexy this is, and every woman who comes on the show has to want to have sex with him. So let's have her be totally in love with Kirk. He's like, "Okay, we can do that." um, Jesus Christ, and. Oh yeah, and then the screenwriter guy is like, oh yeah, so she turns into a giant cat and starts chasing down the hallway, and the producer's guy like, I don't know if we can actually afford that and make that look good. I think it's gonna come off as cheesy, and the screenwriter goes, that works, and there we go, alrighty then. Well, okay then. God damn it. Oh, don't even. I know it's low hanging fruit to criticize the original series for how cheesy and cheap and outdated things look, but I don't know. I bitched about the Windex spray bottle from Conscious of the King, but that's because I forgot about this giant cat thing. I think this is worse, actually. I mean, I can't imagine there was ever a time in existence where this actually looked convincing. Like, I really don't think when this aired in the 60s, people didn't look at that and be like, that's terrible green screen work. Like, that actually does not work at all. Like, they use, whenever Kirk and Spock were in frame, of course you only used a shadow of a cat because they could fake a shadow being big. But then when it was like at a doorway or something, they could superimpose his image. It was very obviously just a household cat that they filmed and then blew up the picture trying to make it look big. It was, oh my god, it was so terrible. Maybe this episode's a good laugh, just for that part. I mean, that part's hilarious, but the majority of the episode is just awful. It's not funny. It's just torture to sit through, like the bullshit nonsense of them of the Halloween show, like especially the scene where Kirk and Spock and McCoy beam down and the fucking witches going, Captain Kirk, like that is not acceptable. I don't give a fuck that this show came out in the 60s. The majority of this show is nowhere near that cheesy. Like, what's the Scooby-Doo? Like, what the hell is that? Oh my god. And then when they and thrown together with the giant cat bullshit, and on top of that the voodoo necklace thing, when they turn to the Enterprise and they're putting it over the candle and everyone's on the ship going, oh, I'm burning up. I'm like, oh my god, what the fuck is this? What is that I'm watching? But anyway, so, god damn it. It's just, oh yeah, I gotta talk about the whole way the episode starts with this dude being transported aboard and he immediately drops dead and this spooky voice comes through his voice saying, go away, there's a curse on the Enterprise. Oh my god, like, and then, oh yeah, you have lines like Kirk when they're down there and Kirk's like, this reminds me of a trick or treat. Like, nobody fucking talks like that. Nobody says that. He's like, oh, someone's playing a trick or treat on. No, it's called a fucking trick. Trick or treat is when you ask for candy, you fucking dumb fuck. But and it to me would be like if they had a Christmas special. on Star Trek, and they were all like, "Oh, 'tis the season, Spock, ho ho ho!" And Santa Claus showed up. Like, that actually wouldn't be as bad as this episode, I don't think. I gotta be fucking honest. If they were having like talking about a Merry Christmas, and you know, in the 23rd century when they're actually supposed to be more secular, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, Merry Christmas, Spock," and "Oh, Spock, here's some Christmas cheer," and exchanging presents, and then Santa Claus actually shows up on the Enterprise and gives everyone presents, and Spock tries to like scan for Santa Claus's face. That would not be as bad as this episode. It wouldn't. It wouldn't. Don't get me wrong, it would still be so fucking cheesy and dumb and terrible, but it still wouldn't be as bad as this episode. I don't understand why so many people like this episode. I just wow. But anyway, couple more things I want to talk to you about concerning the B plot. So, this is the first episode we get Chekhov in, this is part of the reason why I want to do it in production order. This was actually the 8th or so episode to air, but it was the first one made, so it's the first episode made with Pavel Chekhov, and it's the only one where he wore this stupid wig. And so you can tell it's like out of place because they put this wig on because apparently Walter Koenig's hair hadn't grown out and they wanted it long because, alright, here's the thing. When Gene Roddenberry is doing a lot of interviews that I used to watch in the 80s and 90s, and he always tries to self-glorify and make himself in his days in Star Trek, like, make himself come off as like this savior for, you know, social rights and everything, which, learning more about him, you find that's not necessarily the case. And he talks about how, he heard the story several times about how he heard, the Russians were doing the space race, and how he wanted to include Russia into sort of, even though, because this was when tensions were like almost at the highest during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, so it was like controversy, and he wanted to sort of reach out and show that someday, Russia, the Soviet Union, and America would put their sides together and work along together, and that's possible to show a vision of peace, and to show the positive side of Russians who were seen as the ultimate enemy in America at this particular time. And all that may be true. I'm not saying that is not the case, but other more cynical people who were around this time actually say the reason why they added Pavel Chekhov to the show was to have a younger, hotter face, and they wanted to emulate Davy Jones from the Monkees, which is exactly why they give him the goofy wig in this episode, and it had more to do with trying to have more of the, attract more of the women to watch it by having a young, sexy male, which is why in a lot of these earlier episodes Chekhov appears in, he's more of a love interest type. See the Apple, for example. And the whole Russian thing, I mean, I think both things can be true at the same time, to be fair, but I think it was more of, hey, how can we spice this show up rather than let's have more inclusion. Just my 2 cents on this. And I bet you credits to Navy Beans that we won't see DeSalle ever again. Oh my god. I remember watching this episode for the first time with my sister, and when DeSalle said, so there was this force field around the Enterprise, and they couldn't get rid of it, and DeSalle said, we might not be able to break this force field, but I bet you credits to Navy Beans we can dent it. Me and my sister both will start cracking up hysterically. What the fuck does that mean, credits to Navy Beans? That sounds so cheesy. Maybe this is a dated thing, but mind you, I'm talking about the early 90s here. So it was outdated 30 years ago. credits the Navy beans? What the fuck is that? I bet you credits the Navy beans. This episode sucks. Oh my god. I think for a while, me and my sister would jokingly, like mockingly say that to each other. I bet you credits the Navy beans. Now, apparently, I looked this up. Apparently, that was a saying that came out of World War II. But I actually think it didn't survive much past that, and I would venture a guess that this was outdated even in the 60s. Who the fuck says credits name? Oh, god damn it. Yeah, DeSalle is interesting. He appeared in only 3 episodes, apparently, which he had a pretty major role in at least this one and Squire of Gothos, which was the first one he appeared in. And he had a somewhat major appearance in This Side of Paradise. But those were the only 3 episodes that he appeared in. And another interesting thing about this is because I remember Nichelle Nichols was talking about how ridiculous it was that she was lieutenant, but she was never put in command of the Enterprise. And when all the other senior officers left and she was the only one, they had to bring a man up from engineering who was actually of a lower rank than her in order to take command. And I think she was specifically referenced in this episode. At the very least, the interviews would show clips of this episode. Because, yeah, all the other main characters were down the plane. Mind you, this is the first appearance of Chekhov, and he's seen as an ensign, definitely a lower rank than Uhura. But all the other main characters, Kirk, Spock, Scotty, Sulu, McCoy's doctor, but let's throw McCoy in there. They're all on the planet, so instead of, we can't have Uhura be in charge, let's bring up a white man from engineering to be in charge. Now, granted, DeSalle has said, he's been in the show twice before, and he had somewhat major roles, but still, this is something that the animated series corrected, which is one of the things I give the animated series credit for, is that they did in fact put Uhura in command of the Enterprise several times, and she had more sort of commanded more respect in that show than she did here, where they kind of just treated her like a secretary who answers the phones. That's not fair. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they acknowledged her great skill and in the communications range, but not as much as more contemporary shows did, like, for example, Hoshi on Enterprise. They focus more on how skilled and professional she is and how she can translate all these different languages, whereas in the show they don't really focus on that as much as they should, or give her the respect that she deserved, because the 60s was still a bit sexist, and especially television, as we know, because they wouldn't let a female be the first officer. They had to cancel the pilot and say try again because they don't want a woman to be the first officer on the ship. But anywho, kind of getting off on a tangent there. I think that's all I really want to say about this. There's not really much else to say about this episode. How cheesy it was when they had those 2 puppets going boo 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 boo, and they just died like for no reason. I guess they could say they didn't live without the transmuter. But here's the thing about those fan theories I talked about before, about how they looked into nightmares or how they were aliens trying to interpret things. None of that was actually mentioned in the episode itself, and that is always a chief cardinal rule of mine, that if they don't say it in the episode, then it doesn't count. Like, they needed to say, if this was the case, they needed to say it in the episode. They needed to give these characters more motivations that actually made sense. And the fact that they didn't, they focused more on all this stupid nonsense with the witches floating and shit, that tells me that they didn't really have a plan. They didn't really care. They just wanted a bullshit excuse to do some Halloween bullshit. Now, one thing I did want to talk about, actually, that I kept thinking about while watching this episode, which isn't directly related, but is the whole, and it is actually kind of related, because I kind of don't I wouldn't say take offense, but I'm not on board with this imagery of witches and black cats, because it's interesting learning the origins of how those imagery came about, because apparently I want to say exactly when, but sometime in history, in England, the Dark Ages or whatever, witches were people who didn't strictly follow Christianity, and they had what deemed pagan religions or no religions at all, and they were typically women who were smarter. Probably not always women, to be fair. These sexist assholes probably just focus more on the women, but people who were smarter, and they would have brooms because they wanted a clean fucking house, which was not ordinary, like most people didn't do, and so they thought it was weird, like they're actually cleaning their house, like what the hell's wrong with them? And so they didn't know what a broom was, so they was like, what is that weird device? Maybe they used their magic powers to fly on it because I'm an idiot and I don't know what's actually going on. And they had, a lot of them had cats, because cats killed mice and other pests that spread diseases and stuff. And so because these idiots were like, oh, these people are weird, they're outside of our culture, let's demonize them, let's say that they're evil, let's say they have magic powers, and let's associate all this stuff with the devil and evilness and all this stuff. So it's basically all this imagery is coming out of ignorance and people being morons and not understanding people were actually smarter than them and being fearful of them because they're smarter than them, and so they would rather demonize them. And also the imagery of the cats in particular, I'm a cat guy. The imagery of the cats in particular of being evil, or black cats being evil, is actually a horrible thing that's led to a lot of actual people killing black cats and cats who are just, God, I can't even talk about that. And I gotta mention the plague, and where I can't remember what plague they call it, but the plague. That was way worse than it should have been because of the religious, superstitious people going around killing all the cats because they thought cats were evil. But what in fact they did is by killing all the cats, they let the rat population explode, and the rats were the ones spreading the fucking disease, so they just made the disease way worse. And so I think that's relevant to this episode because this episode uses that imagery which is based in ignorance. Now, that's not to say I'm against Halloween imagery when they have a witch flying around going here, or imagery like that in kids shows and whatnot, because it's just goofy and silly, whereas Star Trek is actually supposed to be taken seriously. And so for them to rely on these stupid, goofy, nonsensical, ignorant imagery, I think is something this show, even back then in the 60s, is way better than and never should have done. So anyway, sorry if it felt like I got on my high horse for a minute there, but God, this whole episode just bothers me. So, let me thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me throughout the channel. Of course, it's always very much appreciated. We have Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Howells. Thank you so much for your support. Always, of course, very much appreciated, and the lifeblood of my channel, as I like to say. So, we have a few Patreon comments on this episode that I would like to read aloud. First, there is Ricky, who says, This episode is terrible. I will just call it out right from the get-go. The episode is cheesy, dumb, and I hate Halloween episodes. They are dumb. Do I even have to mention the final act with the cat chase scene? How fake it looks. Also, the famous line, Captain Kirk! Captain Kirk! Cheesy. Top 3 worst for me, so of course my rating is a 1 out of 10. Maddie Jester says, double toil and trouble, fire burning, Colburn bubble. This episode is cursed! Stay away! Woo! Ghost emoji. Seriously, this episode is one of the worst ever. I'd rather watch A Night in Sickbay than this. Not even laughing at the terrible puppets at the end with visible strings gets it any bonus points from me. Leave Halloween specials to The Simpsons. 1 giant cat out of 10. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say I'd rather watch A Night in Sickbay. That's a pretty bold statement I don't think I'm prepared to make, but I definitely agree with your sentiments on how terrible this episode is. Brandon Neal Howells says, Catspaw. I have watched this episode many times and I still have no idea what it's about. If there is a plot, it makes no sense. And why the fuck did Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, write this crap? Horrible, horrible, horrible. 1 monster made out of pipe cleaners out of 10. Now, I looked this up out of curiosity, and those monsters were indeed, those puppets we saw at the end of the episode were indeed, in fact, made out of pipe cleaners and a few other things, but there were definitely pipe cleaners involved. Oh god, they look so cheesy. But anyway, yeah, the guy who wrote Psycho wrote this. Wow. Wow, just a giant wow. That is so hard to believe. He must have not given a shit and just did this for a paycheck. That's just my guess, but what do I know? So anyway, my rating for Catspaw out of 10 is a 1. Of course, the worst. This is my top 3, I think, worst episodes of the original series. I do believe this is in my top 3, at least top 5. I think this is number 3 worst of the entire original series. I can't believe there were so many positive reviews for this episode. I just can't possibly. Star Trek is better than this. It should be better than this. It should never stoop as low as to have a cheesy Halloween episode with a plot that makes no sense and just a bunch of stupid imagery of Halloween and scaring and beware and let's name drop trick or treat just to make the kiddies happen, I guess, and throw in Chekhov and make him give him the stupid wig and make him look like Davy Jones from the Monkees. And I bet you credits to Navy Beans, this is one of the worst episodes of the entire fucking show. Anyway, that is it for my review of Catspaw, which I will reiterate, I don't even take enjoyment at. This isn't a so bad it's good like Spock's Brain. This is just a so bad it's bad and I never want to watch it again. Although the giant cat stuff is funny, I will admit, but it's not worth watching, sitting through the agony of watching this episode. So that is it for my review of Catspaw. Let me check my trusty little schedule here to see what is coming up next. So next Monday will be my review for Metamorphosis, and then Wednesday will be my review for Friday's Child, and then Friday will be my review for Who Mourns for Adonis. So all 3 new fresh reviews going public on my channel next week. So you can definitely check those out, and be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos and many more shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.